Molweni, my name is Luvuyo Madasa. I'm a director at ReimagineSA. And thank you once again for making the time to join us this morning for a continuation of a conversation about the importance of not only reimagining South Africa, but today we are getting together to discuss the importance of an inclusive economy. And in today's discussion, we will be joined by Dr. Mamphela Ramphele, co-founder of ReimagineSA and current co-president of the Club of Rome. And among other responsibilities that she's had during her career is that of the managing director of the World Bank. And also joining us today is Ottilia Maunganidze, head of special projects at the Institute for Security Studies. And our third panelist today will be Shakes Motsilili, actuary and co-founder of Alumni Energy Investments. And today's discussion, I think it is quite important for us to understand that it is just that, but it's about bringing various different perspectives and experience based on our working environments of what it actually means for us to do this work of facilitating inclusive economy. And to anchor this conversation, I'd like to lead with the following introduction before I then hand over to our panelists to give brief intros of themselves. And that is to say, when I personally think of the word economy, I don't limit it to the reality of very many of us being in any number of the urban settings or the peri-urban township communities. But I also think about in terms of what this discussion means when I bring it down into real granular terms to the village that I come from, which is about an hour and a half away from Umtata, a village of Engele, which continues to struggle with issues of running accessible water and issues of electricity and connectivity. So when we have these discussions around the importance of an inclusive economy, let us be mindful that our discussions in one way or another are, or need to in the near future, impact in a very meaningful way the people that are in the far-flung communities in our country, that is South Africa. And with that said, I'd like to invite Dr. Ramphele to just give a brief introduction, and then I will go on to our panelists as well.
Thank you, Luvuyo. Thank you, Luvuyo, and thanks to all those who are participating. I belong to a generation that is responsible for the failures that led to the images that we saw in July of an uprising. Those images will forever be imprinted in our memories as cries of people who have been dehumanized, excluded, and their hopes of what freedom would bring trampled upon. And trampled upon by the very people who are meant to serve them. Those images of exclusion were predominantly images of young people and women. The fires that were ignited by the instigators on that day and the broken windows are a marker of the extent to which we as South Africans have been dehumanized, and that those who have captured our state instead of serving us will stop at nothing to continue to feed their insatiable greed. And that reminded me of the words of Paulo Freire that energized us as young people in the 70s to stand up and say, we are Black, we are proud, and we are going to be free. And this is what Paulo Freire said. Dehumanization, which marks not only those whose humanity has been stolen, but also those who have stolen it, is a distortion of the vocation of what it means to be human. The vocation of being human is to be in mutually supporting relationships. Our ancestors understood this truism, and they did so by studying nature around them. They learned from nature that the species that thrives the best is the one that contributes the most to the ecosystem. So the philosophy of Ubuntu ought to be the philosophy that's driving the kind of policy choices we make in politics, in economic models of development. And yet, here we sit with a neoliberal economic system that has failed us for 27 years, and with no sign that those who have the power to change things, including you and I as voters, are actually making this the issue that we have to raise to reclaim our humanity. To the extent that we live in this unequal society, our humanity is being stolen by none other than us who are complicit. So I'm here today with these young people, proud to know that many of them are indeed standing up to lead. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And with that, I'd like to invite Ottilia to give her introduction, and then we'll follow Sheikh's. Ottilia?
Thanks a lot, Luvuyo and Dr. Ramphele. You know, when I was thinking about how best to tackle this topic, but also the most careful way to have this conversation, recognizing, Luvuyo, what you said in your opening, which is even in a forum like this, people are excluded because of lack of access to means of communication, or simply because they're not within the same networks in which some of these conversations are being had. And I thought back first to about 3 weeks ago, when Statistics South Africa released the quarterly unemployment statistics. Since they started releasing unemployment statistics every quarter, I kept thinking, but every single quarter, it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse because we're not doing the things that we need to do to be able to ensure not only that people are employed, but people are not underemployed and are not in precarious employment. And that we recognize the contribution that the sectors we refer to as informal are in fact our primary sectors. That we need to have ways in which we actually don't speak about uplifting people, but we speak about recognizing the critical role that domestic workers, gardeners, bin collectors do in ensuring that this engine runs. And because we speak of some sectors as being outside of the economy, when we speak about an inclusive economy, we're talking about including them in an economy that we say they're not really a part of. But the reality is, across our communities, our families are built on the labor, rather, of those very people that we seek to include in an economy. And so my plea today really is about opening our minds a little bit more, about understanding that our society runs not necessarily on the things that we presume it does, but actually that it runs on the labor, and I keep repeating labor because it's undercompensated, sometimes uncompensated labor that's keeping us going. It's when that very same foundation of our society is struck at that we see things that may shock us. And I say us because I recognize that all four of us today are people within the middle income or up band. So things that will say, oh my goodness, but why, or how could this possibly happen? Even as we recognize that inequality, poverty, unemployment are key features of this society. And we need to be sure that when we speak about inclusion, we're not talking about including people in the things that affect society, but rather we're talking about the things that we need to build society. It means doing something as simple, perhaps, as recognizing that street vendors in the Johannesburg CBD contribute immensely to what this economy is. What do they need? They need protection. They need to be able to sell their wares in places that are safer for them. Importantly, they need to be able to ensure that they don't have wastage. What we don't need to see, we don't need to see the metropolitan police departments across this republic going to those same vendors and telling them, you are not welcome here because you're selling your wares in front of a big bank, but rather providing spaces in which they can be able to do so. Because it is those very same people that are ensuring that what we saw in July doesn't happen in the way that it did again. It was communities, and I'm going to end on this point, Luvuyo. It was communities ultimately that stopped and said, but we are the ones affected. We are the ones that are going to need to rebuild this society. We can count on other people to do that, and maybe they will, but ultimately, it was ownership of this is our community that helped to quell that violence. And I think we need to remind ourselves regularly of that fact, that when we speak about ensuring that we get somewhere, we're not taking people with us. We are joining people already on a path towards their own economic emancipation.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Ottilia. Sheikhs and Mhlekazi, zithethile imbokodo. It's your turn to give your introduction.
Thanks, Luvuyo. Yeah, I think I got the short end of the stick, speaking after the two ladies and some of the powerful things that they've just said. I think what I want to say, I think from Doc's intro, is that indeed we are the most unequal country in the world. And that is such a terrible accolade to have. I mean, in the whole wide world, we have what is called the worst Gini coefficient, which is a measure of wealth distribution in any country, and we have the worst in the country. So literally, this means that we've got some of the richest people in the world, but the bulk of our community and country is very poor. And I think what happened in July is just testament to that, to the fact that you cannot have a country that can operate, into the foreseeable future under such conditions. And I think the big question is, how do we, address this very difficult situation? And I come from the side of what I term impact investing. And this is where you find entrepreneurs that look at problems in society and look at innovating and finding ways in which to solve these problems. And what I found in my journey is that most entrepreneurs, first of all, are not supported. And secondly, they don't have access to funds, et cetera, et cetera. And my contribution to the current situation is in finding these opportunities that can actually have high impact and can actually change, the situation that we find ourselves in. I think, this subject is so emotive to me and so broad that I think we could spend days or weeks, talking about it and how, I believe, certain things need to change and how they need to change. And I think, to give Luvuyo probably, the one to be the one to steer, what I actually, focus on, because I don't want to be all over the show, and I can't be all over the show, about the subject, because, we can talk about the fact that, what are big telcos doing, access to the internet, being a human right, and the fact that our prepaid, data costs are just off the charts, and these companies are making super profits. We talk about banking, but how financial institutions are in the business of getting people indebted, taking out bonds, and it's scary to see that in Sandton, where my offices happen to be, and I'm in the business of raising funds, I realized that most of what we believe are sort of the so-called new black middle class is actually living paycheck to paycheck. Every month the bank takes a large chunk for the bond. They take a large chunk for the sports car. There's a large chunk taken for the private schools that they take the kids to, and there's barely nothing left to even buy food and fuel. Yet we think that this is, these people have been liberated. They've actually achieved financial liberation in a sense, but in fact, this is all deception. So what we need to do is we need to go back to the foundations of what we want for ourselves as a people and how we want to achieve each of those objectives. And we need to literally reimagine, everything. We simply cannot continue doing things as they are being done at the moment and how they have been done in the past. And that's me for an introduction for now.
Thank you for that introduction, Shakes. And I think it gets us right into the crux of the conversation. While I am about to segue over to Ottilia, I'd like to invite all the guests to continue sharing any comments, any questions that you may have as the discussion goes along. We're going to try have this be as interactive as possible, component of the panelists sharing some of the points that they wanted to bring to the table today, along with yourselves, and finding an opportunity to respond to some of any questions that you may have. So please feel free. We are monitoring the Q&A box as well as the chat box. So whether you pose your questions in the Q&A or you send them as pointed questions to the panelists, we are seeing those come in. So with that, I'd like to ask Ottilia a bit of a difficult question that on the next is going to segue quite interestingly to some of the work that Dr. Ramphele has been doing at a global and then bringing it into a continental and local level. And that is to say, with ISS and the work that you do, what would be your reflection? And you've made quite an important point around what JMPD is doing in terms of the vendors that are interestingly placed in front of the shop front of any banks or any other more established, if you will, vendors. What would you say the policy landscape in South Africa looks like? Is it one that is enabling to this conversation of an inclusive economy?
Thanks, Luvuyo. I just want to clarify. I purposefully said a metropolitan police department because it's not just Johannesburg. In fact, we've seen very similar images out of eThekwini, out of eKapa. We've seen the very same images. And I start there because it actually responds in part to your question. Because when you see across the country, across what are considered our economic hubs, when you see efforts towards excluding certain elements of our economy from just making ends meet, this is not a personal choice on the part of a member of the Metropolitan Police Department. In fact, if you were to explore their own familial makeup, you might find that they have relatives, friends that are in similar precarious forms of employment. They are doing so because they are enforcing the law. Now, you've got to understand, I'm a lawyer, and yet I come from the point of departure that the law is not always rather serving the population. Now, why do I say that? And perhaps South Africa is the easiest place to say that. Because prior to 1994, the system that we now refer to as an illegitimate system of repression, both racially, but also economically, was a legal system. It was a system codified and entrenched legally. It wasn't right, and we know it wasn't right. And there were many within that very same system, whether judges, whether politicians, whether community workers, that did what they could to ensure that that system does not subsist. Now, why do I go all the way back to respond to your question, Luvuyo? What Sheikh said about reimagining the way that we do things and the manner in which we do things connects with a comment that Rudston Cullen has just made in the chat box, which is around inequality even within the workspaces and how we regulate them. What does the policy landscape look like? The policy landscape remains largely unchanged as far as the economy is concerned. So what we've done is we have tried to make the least possible adjustments to a system of economy while trying to include. We are saying, for example, that Gauteng is open for all, while we recognize how structurally built it is in an exclusionary manner. It cannot be that we don't have new policies in place that try to rid us of apartheid geographies. That it takes someone who lives in the southwestern townships of Johannesburg so long to get to work is untenable. That it costs more to leave Khayelitsha to go work in the City Bowl in Cape Town. It cannot be. And the way in which we change that is by changing not only practice, but policy. Practice, we've learned over and over again, follows policy. What we have is we have ideals, whether it's our national development plan. So we have things that are not set in policy yet that speak to what we want to achieve. But our policies still, unfortunately, are lagging behind. And we're not going to get the kind of change that we want if we push change your practices, because what we know is people will refer back to the thing that allows them to operate. So they will say, in fact, I don't need to ensure that my staff component has 50% women or that the youth are factored in, because there's nothing that tells me that I must do that. And that's what we need to change. We need to make it such that we're not putting members of metropolitan police departments across this country in uncomfortable positions where the shops and their stalls that they're dismantling are the shops and stalls built by their mothers that have ensured that they get the education that they need to be in the positions that they're in. That's untenable. We're asking ourselves to basically, by implementing policies, we're asking ourselves to actually shun parts of our society, and we need to fix that. And I'm going to end on a minor point on where we need to fix this. We're speaking about an inclusive economy, Luvuyo, but in fact, our policy framework is not just about an economy. We need to fix our social welfare processes and payouts. We need to fix our infrastructure. And I don't mean just road infrastructure. We actually need to fix what Rudston is asking us to fix in the chat. We need to fix how we bridge inequality by not encouraging excessive wealth within the very same companies, factories, spaces in which we work. Thank you, Luvuyo.
Thank you, Ottilia, for that response. Just for everyone's, I'm not sure if everyone can actually see Rudston's comments, so I'm just going to read it out so that you have context to the points that Ottilia was touching on. And in the main, it starts off with we hardly ever seem to hear about inequality within corporations in South Africa. It continues to say, according to the IOL Global Wage Inequality Report of 2018, South Africa has the highest wage inequality of all countries surveyed. Can CEOs feel fine earning 100 times the pay of their staff, feel no shame, feel that this is sustainable, and this needs to be exposed so we can choose with whom we do our business? So that is just the point that Ottilia was addressing in her response. And just checking here, we do have Dr. Ramphele, who will be next then to touch on. And as you do speak to the points that you want to address, I would invite you to weave in the work that you have been doing, not only in founding of ReimagineSA, but also as co-president of Club of Rome, along with establishing a Club of Rome Africa office that then looks to bring in various different thought and action leaders into addressing some of the points that Ottilia has raised in her response. Understanding, though, that it's still at quite an early stage, but again, looking to address that holistic perspective of individuals in economies. Over to you, Makul.
Thank you very much, Luvuyo. Ottilia, I think it goes beyond policy and practice. We as Africans on this entire continent have lost our humanity. We don't see the women in the streets as you or me or my mother. They are the poor. They are the squatters. We other them. And so we don't have any connection with them that generates that, hey, that face is the face of my mother. That face is the face of my child. It's just another. And it is also still color-coded. So the CEOs that we're talking about Ralston is talking about in the chat, they don't see anything remiss about this huge gap, because after all, they feel entitled. Because they are where they are, they believe they're entitled. The same thing with the companies that, like the MTNs, the Vodacoms, and all of the others, the Cell Cs, when they sell data for the poorest people in this country at hugely inflated costs, they're not thinking about the food they're taking away from these people's mouths and the mouths of their children. They're simply chasing this mirage of super wealth. And for that, we have to take responsibility as the entire citizenry of South Africa that has allowed successive post-1994 governments to continue to perpetuate inequalities through the kind of policy choices they make. But we know now from the Zondo Commission that not only have they failed to change the policies, they actually take from the Commonwealth what needs to be going into making sure there's no sewage running in the street, that people are actually taken care of wherever they are, whether they are in Duba or they are in Bochum. But no, it's about, this is an economic, socioeconomic development model that says me, myself, and I. Not the Ubuntu model that says there cannot be a me without a we. And so to the extent that there are people out there who are homeless, who are living in Khayelitsha, and I just wake up and walk to my office, I don't see that because I've blinded myself. And this is where Paulo Freire talks about, when you steal the humanity of a people, you, the thief, also are stealing your own humanity. And that is why we have tolerated this increasing inequality, even as we talk about a free, new South Africa. There is nothing free about South Africa for as long as so many are imprisoned by dehumanizing poverty, because all of us are dehumanized by that. Now, this is not just a South African phenomenon. It's a global phenomenon. And the sad reality is that post-colonial Africa adopted this neoliberal system. But look at what they did. The people who gave us this poison, when they hit COVID, they hit planetary emergencies or floods and so on, they dump all of the precepts of, debt to GDP ratio, you don't print money. They do. Because what? They see their citizens as themselves. What do? We give citizens 350 Rand to live on for a month. And we steal even the money that is supposed to be giving Makumalo a mask and making sure that they've got access to healthcare. So I think what we at the global level are seeing is the need for a new emerging new civilization that teaches us anew how to be human. And that requires fundamental reimagining of what it means to be human, that you can't be human for as long as you live and tolerate and participate in systems that dehumanize others. But there's another wonderful reality that we are seeing. Africa has the youngest population profile in the world. Africa has 60% of what remains of arable land in the world. Africa has the richest mineral deposits. Africa is not a poor continent, but it is being impoverished by our failure to reimagine a way of being as an African continent, the mother continent, to live and, to establish the kind of socioeconomic development models that would include, first, the kind of education systems that we are perpetuating are still the English grammar schools, is madness by any means. We need to have new, different teaching and learning processes. And we have models of that. The LEAP school model is a model of a way of approaching education that first and foremost, every child who goes into that school is made to know that they belong, is made to know that they're a genius, is made to know that their mother tongue is important, is made to know their history and their pride as Africans. It's not money, it's mindset. So part of what we talk about in the Club of Rome and the emerging new civilization is that we need to shift mindsets away from this manufactured scarcity to the abundance of riches that we have. All we need is to have leaders who can govern in a way that makes that possible. So the Club of Rome relies on young people to be the consciences. And as I said in my introductory comments, throughout history, not just in South Africa, young people are the ones when their elders fail, and my generation has failed to translate the ideals of freedom into lived reality for the majority of people. And that's happened across the African continent. So the Club of Rome is also calling young people to rise to their responsibility, to reimagine leadership anew. Don't emulate the Mandelas or the Sisurus or the Bikos or the Mamphelas. You must reimagine what it means to lead in the 21st century and to dismantle these dehumanizing frameworks and challenge the banks. Banks have become like, when we grew up, there was something called Muchaina, where people came and our grandmothers would bet tiki in the hope of getting something. That's what the banks in this country are doing and globally are doing, which is extract from the poorest and then invest in the richest, the suburbs of Sandton and Co. And so the challenge I'm putting on the table this morning is for young people, whoever you are, wherever you are, look around you. If you are in an enterprise that's doing what Ratson is talking about, what are you doing about it? Don't come and complain to us. If you are part of a system that is continuing the dehumanization, the color coding, you are complicit unless you stand up and say it. And I want to comment, there is a YouTube record of Professor Alan Busak, which was given on the 11th of September at the Cathedral of St. George's in Cape Town. It's worth reading. It's worth listening to. Instead of listening to quiet or music, just listen to Alan Busak. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Makul. Speaking of working to challenge dehumanizing systems, Shakes, you and I have had some very interesting conversations offline about the work that you're doing at Alumni Energy Investments. And you spoke about the inhibiting relationship we have with banks. Can you elaborate a bit more when we are speaking now? And I guess this could be your response to that call to action about what are you doing about changing those dehumanizing systems? I don't know if that question makes sense. And then after that, we will start dealing with some of the comments and questions that are in the chat box.
Thanks, Luvuyo. Wow, a lot has been said, and I think when we talk about big institutions that are really almost behind what is happening in the country, and a lot of these institutions are making super profits. For me, one of the easiest ways to analyze that there's something wrong is to look at the profit margins, right? So if you are an insurer, I'll come back to the bank just now. So if you are in the insurance business, the reason that insurance was created was because of what is called pooling of risk. So if we were, say, 1,000 people, we then all pay an amount, say, every month, and we say, if one of us dies, then the pooled amount is able to be paid out to the person that dies, and it's based on the principle that not everybody will pass away at the same time, and that's the basis of insurance. And in theory, if you do the numbers correctly, you are able to run a business that the first principle, it's for the benefit of the insured. So each and every person that has taken out insurance and is pulling the money together, that is why you have insurance. And of course, there will be a little bit of fat for the people that are running the scheme, as it were. But you are supposed to make what I would say are ordinary profits. Now, if you look at insurance companies in South Africa, for decades and decades, they make super profits. All that means is that every person is paying way higher than they should for the insurance levels that they're getting. It's as simple as that. And now Ottilia maybe can talk to this. I mean, I don't know what policy can do to actually clamp down on that, because it's a problem. I think, in my opinion, we need to have ethical and responsible insurance companies that will insure people at the right levels of premium and will make ordinary profits. And that's what we need. So and it is rough. And from my side, I am involved at the moment. We're waiting for the insurance license to be issued by the Prudential Authority. So pretty soon I will be part of an insurance business, and we hope to really be an ethical insurance provider. So that's what I'm doing in that front. Now let's talk about banks, as you said. When you look at, for instance, and they publish these things. if you go at the fees that you pay to have a banking account, right? Interestingly enough, the poorer you are, the more fees you pay. How does that make sense? In fact, beyond a certain level of wealth, you pay zero fees. How can you run a business model that actually literally penalizes you for being a low-income payer and rewards high-income payers? It's crazy. It's madness, in my opinion. And the reality is that, yet again, I am involved in something. Unfortunately, I cannot mention the specifics at this point, but we are working towards also having a banking license that will allow us to actually do ethical banking. And what I mean by ethical banking is not going to previously disadvantaged people and offering them at high interest rates and things like that. It's actually thinking about the client, going and bringing up products where I'm not interested in getting.
Seems we're having some challenges with connectivity with shakes. I'd like to take this opportunity to deal with
to find innovative. I may have cut for a second. Am I back?
Yes, you're back. I think you can finish the thought that you've just.
So I was saying, now, can you imagine why can a financial institution, a bank, not look at the clients as partners and say, okay, here is a person X, they are currently earning 3,000 Rand a month. What can I do with everything I have access to as a bank in terms of information, knowledge, and things like that? How can I improve this individual's financial situation? So I'm not in the business of getting that 3,000 for myself. I'm actually in the business of improving that person's life and financial well-being. It's just a change in mindset and how to think and how to do things. And I can tell you now, the bank will be the winner, still thinking in that way. The problem is that banks are thinking in a way that they've always thought for hundreds of years. They haven't changed their thinking. And we need to now create new age institutions that actually think about what their clients' well-being is. I will make an example. Yet again, I'm not supposed to say, but I mean, we were brainstorming with my business partner in the insurance business. I said, listen, how can we insure people without actually taking a premium from them? This is the level of thinking we need to be engaging in. To say, I want to insure people, but I know they don't have a lot of money that they're making. I still want to insure them, and I don't want to take a premium from them. How can I still run a business without actually taking from their pay? And I think people have fallen into, I want to say, positions of luxury and relaxation, and they're not really stretching their mind. There are so many things that are possible, and it is our responsibility to feel like that. And we have had some chats. I think that one thing I will take as a blame is that I've always and have been navigating within the existing policy framework. And I've never really until today thought about perhaps how can we influence policy to actually make our work a bit easier, to make, everything to be aligned, to work in the correct manner. And I think it's based on a position of where we are from and where we understand and we see that the system that we're born into has been structured to actually destroy us and take us backwards. And what we have literally been focused on is how do we navigate within this very unfair system to get forward. But now the debate today is actually taking one step further to say, no, we mustn't even accept the system itself. We must find ways to change the policy, to change the system itself, because it's so difficult. I mean, my life is a tortured life in the sense that it is a life of sacrifice, because you are navigating impossible obstacles. Everything is preventing a previously disadvantaged Black person to operate independently in the financial services sector in South Africa is next to impossible. And we are operating under those situations.
Thank you for those points. And quite interestingly, and I'm glad to see some of the attendees, we do have an attendee, I shall not name him, just so that I don't put pressure on him, who's here in his personal capacity, but does work with one of our bigger financial institutions. We also do have people who are in the audience who are at very advanced stages of putting forward solutions that can potentially be taken up in the effort of solving. So I think another thing that we would like to start bringing to be front and center in a lot of these conversations is conversing not only just to share perspectives, but to identify potential partnerships in a lot of these engagements. So for all those that are in the audience, I hope you are listening and hearing some of the points of convergence that you may have with not only just the panelists, but some of the people that are in the audience sharing their comments. And with that, I'd like to bring in Ganesh's comment. In fact, Reza and Ganesh's comment, they've had a very interesting exchange, in part answering each other's questions, but I think it's still something.
Before you do that,
yes.
I was going to say, before you do that, Ganesh is actually my key individual for my fund, and Reza is a business associate as well, interesting enough. Yeah.
So you've padded your own audience members. This is not a fair But with that, I'd like to, there's a point that you brought in, Shakes, earlier about, just the telecoms and what they can do. And I'd like to take Reza's comment as a segue into Ganesh's. And the point here is South Africa needs a virtual infrastructure that supports entrepreneurs in broad spectrum business, management focus areas. And to the next one, I think Ganesh also then speaks to some examples, one on the continent and the other in the East, the two, and that is there are successful examples of countries that have had devastating circumstances happen to their economies, yet have turned themselves around. Rwanda, South Korea, Singapore. The SA economy has been dominated by oligopoly within the various sectors, telecoms, food, retail, banking, etc. What will make these players allow new players, or new entrants rather, into the market to share in the piece of that pie? And I think what could be one of those responses to that, and I don't know if we want to address those questions before I get into the next 2 points. Ottilia, you've got a thumbs up, so I'm giving this over to you.
Thanks a lot, Luvuyo. So when I read Ganesh's comment earlier, the thing that came to me, which I say so many times that it's almost like a broken record, I asked the question, what's more South African than collusion? Because unfortunately, the foundation of a lot of our businesses, Shakes was talking about insurance earlier, and I always play a little game with friends and family where I ask them, do you know who's underwriting your insurance? And I play that game because when they do that, so when they read the fine print of their varying contracts, and they say, I chose this insurance because it's better than this one. And I'm like, but it's one company. They found innovative ways to market their brands to different segments of society under often different names, but it's one company. Whether you go to buy your clothes at Ackermans, or you buy your toiletries at Clicks, or your groceries at Pick and Pay, you are buying from the same group. Whether it's ShopRite or Checkers or Boxer Superstores, same group. Whether it's Woolworths, Country Road, Trenery, same group. The Foschini Group, the Truworths Group. And I'm naming them not to shame them, because they've been built off a history of, in order for you to be able to make it within this economy, you need to club together. One of the biggest controversies within South Africa of the past 20 or so years was a certain collusion that a lot of people may not know about. It was the bread cartels. It wasn't just that they were colluding at the production of bread, it was the mills, it was the wheat growers, it was then the production and the distribution of bread. Why is that for me a key and fundamental issue that we need to address? Because when you collude in respect of one of the most basic goods for any person within South Africa, the food that anyone should be able to buy, such that you can be able to price fix and make it such that a loaf of bread suddenly across all shops is now 14.99 Rand, in a space, as Dr. Ramphele rightly pointed out, where people that are in dire straits are being given 350 Rand. I'm not a mathematician, so I'm going to call on Shakes to do the maths for me. I mean, he's the actuary, so he can crunch the numbers and tell me what portion is 14.99 Rand of 350 Rand in a month for a mother that must support not herself alone, but her children as well as other relatives. And when you collude on the price of bread, you're actually fighting the population, but you do it not for them, you do it to make a profit. Would you benefit more if some of the resources were more accessible to a wider base? Would it benefit South Africa if we had a bigger tax base? It would definitely do so. I challenged people a few months ago when the first quarterly unemployment stats were brought out. And I challenged people to how many people do they really think are paying pay as you earn? Not just paying it. So I'm not talking about people evading tax. I'm talking about people whose income is sufficient that according to the South African Revenue Service, they can pay income tax. I promise you, not one person got it right because they used themselves as the measure of income. When the reality is over 82% of our society earns below a living wage of 7,000 Rand. So where are you going to get that tax? Where are you going to get the ability to redistribute wealth if you're only taking it from a small portion? The best way to do that, and Ganesh alludes to this in his question, the best way to do that is to have proper regulatory measures in place that don't necessarily fully break down the oligopolies, but actually make it such that if this is your chosen path, so if you do want to be in an oligopoly, you must pay for it. Put simply, we can't eat the rich, but we can tax them.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I don't think we should spiral into cannibalism, but I think the point is very well landed, very well landed. We have a question from Pumlani Mvenyana, and it is banks, insurance companies, and most businesses are primarily concerned with making profits. And I think this touches on the point that you've just made, Ottilia. Can you share a bit of how impact investing can assist in growing profits? Is it possible that impact investment and profit seeking are not opposites? And is there a need to enforce impact investment, much like BEE laws, in order to tackle inequality? Shakes, I think this is well within your domain.
Yeah, mate. That's why I raised my hand. Pumlani Mvenyana is my friend, as a matter of interest again. But look, what I really believe in is that if there's different types of entrepreneurs, right? But high impact entrepreneurs going to, and then they have very small subset, but they usually want to solve a very big problem in society. And their initial motive, what drives them, is a passion to solve the problem, not a profit motivation. The money takes care of itself. You know, you solve a big enough problem and you change people's lives, they'll pay you for it. And then I think, you know, that is my business principle. Yes, a lot of people believe that I'm maybe a communist to a certain extent, but the reality of it, that's a bit of a joke, but the reality of it is that if you go and find a real problem. I'm going to, as an example, if you go and look at women that sell fruit and veg in the mornings, how cold it is, right? And let's say you go and find a solution for them to keep warm and safe. The motivation is to keep them warm and safe, and the motivation is from a humanistic point of view, right? They will pay you for that solution, or someone will pay for that solution. I don't think we need to be so focused on the money. I think, of course, everybody must be rewarded for hard work, and it has been proven in history that a lot of entrepreneurs that have come with very innovative, big solutions get rewarded, and a lot of them initially were struggling and probably started their businesses out of their garage or stuff like that. But they had such a novel and innovative, idea that they got rewarded invariably during the course of their business, life cycle. The reality is that being an entrepreneur means that initially there is a term called the valley of death. There is a period where, irrespective of how amazing your idea is, your innovation is, you may run out of money. And that's when you have to persevere and find ways in which your business sort of gets through that caveat of the valley of death and is able to succeed and then start, being successful, and you expand and things like that. So to answer the question, please, that you can definitely marry impact investing with profit making. But my opinion is that the profit sorts itself out. Of course, if you run a business based on good business principles, I always advocate on break even. Focus on your business being able to sustain itself. So if you run a business that can cover its costs, so you provide the service, it covers its costs, that's a successful business. You don't have to be making profits, but you just need to break even to have a viable business. Then as time goes on, you then expand and you then start making profits, et cetera, et cetera. And I think from what we have been talking about, if you're running an ethical business, you're not looking to be making super profits, because that means you're overcharging for your services or your product. What you want is to make just, I think, okay profits to justify, your contribution and your hard work. Our issue, with COVID and everything that has happened, and I looked at the financial results of one insurance company, and they're doing okay. They're doing so well, with everything that has happened. Nobody could have really anticipated the deaths that would come with COVID and the illnesses and other things from a healthcare perspective. But these companies are making such massive profits, such super profits, that they literally are not really bothered by what is happening. It already shows that there's a huge opportunity to actually come in and do things differently and do things the right way.
Thank you for that, Shakes. Dr. Ramphele, there's a question directed to you from Reza, and is what are your thoughts on decentralized finance? It is direct competition to the traditional financial system.
Well, we have just heard from Shakes about the possibilities. It's about reimagining a different way of thinking about finance and the economy. And part of what we do at the Club of Rome is to encourage the reframing of economics away from this traditional neoliberal system, which has failed everywhere else, but that is totally inappropriate for our needs. Because if we really want to have inclusive economies, they must be bottom up. They must deal with the Makumaro in the streets of Johannesburg or in the footpaths of Ngeleni. So that's one thing, but it also talks to the issue of the values that drive economies. If your value is measured by GDP, gross domestic product, what it means is actually that you're measuring everything, including the things that damage well-being. So you measure, the super profits that you're talking about, and all of it, we are not measuring good. Whereas the reframing of economics is about making well-being for all people the measure of how good an economy is doing. Just look at New Zealand, look at countries, even Rwanda, which was at the time when we got our freedom, in a genocide situation. And typical South African, many of us were not even aware of it. But look where they are versus where we are, because they have made it their business to have an inclusive economy. Now, you're asking about decentralizing finance. Have we forgotten that actually many of the financial institutions that are building the Sandtons and the Cape Towns of this day actually have captured decentralized financial systems designed by our grandmothers and grandfathers? Think of stokvels, think of savings clubs, think of funeral associations. I mean, what happened with the VBS is the latest. That one was just highway robbery. But there are many other robberies that have been committed by established banks to kill off decentralized banking. And this is where I'm grateful to the likes of Shades. You need to recapture those savings clubs, those funeral associations, those stokvels from the clutches of these hyenas back to the people so that people can have money circulating in their communities. Our grandparents always had a way of saving within their village communities, within their township communities. I also want to bring in the issue of buying power. Look what's happened to the moms and pop shops in the townships. They're dead. They are replaced by Boxer. And you think, oh, well, I don't have money to go to Checkers, so you go to Boxer. Why didn't you go to mama and pop shops? We didn't support them. And of course, with July, what happened in July opened our eyes to when things are decentralized to communities, when communities feel this is ours, although they were not really theirs, but those were their convenience places. Communities will not burn down things where they feel those things belong to them and they serve them. My final point is on the issue of internet and spectrum. I mean, can you imagine 27 years later, we still have a government that's thinking of releasing spectrum. Do you think there is a kind of blockade somewhere? No, it's about super profits. They are protecting the existing internet companies. They are protecting the existing monopolies so that, because many of the people in our governing party are shareholders in those, and they don't want to lose out on the super profits. Now, I want to leave you with one example. You talked about the Singapores and the Koreas and so on. China is a country that is often looked at with very either super admiring eyes or condemning eyes. You need to look at the good things that they do. Of course, don't ignore the human rights violation. But what they've done recently is to establish something that they call a common prosperity revolution. What is it? They're going to all the billionaires in China and say, my dear men, and they're men, You can't, in your lifetime or the lifetime of your third or fifth generation, spend the 6 or 12 or 40 billion that you have. So we are now going to leave you with whatever, whether it's 2 billion, because that too will lead you, you'll still have the money in 3 generations. The rest we are taking back to the fiscus, so that those people who are living on the borderline of poverty, they've lifted many out of poverty, but those who are still struggling, we can have the resources to be able to provide them with all the essentials. And guess what? Wall Street cried foul. The billionaires in China are queuing up to hand back their billions. Because how are you going to spend 40 billion? You tell me, explain that to me. And they realize that they'll have a better society where there is greater distribution of the fruits of prosperity. That's something for us to think about amongst the new age institutions that Shakes is challenging us to think about.
Ngos Makul. Shakes, I think over to you, if you could elaborate on Reza's question around decentralization of finance from a blockchain perspective. What are your thoughts on that? And I know that Makulu, you have some thoughts around the technology itself, so it would be good just to get an engagement on that as well.
Yeah, so I think 100%, I think decentralization of finance in terms of your traditional banks to blockchain, for me, is the future, right? We can go into in-depth discussions about asset-backed cryptocurrencies, non-asset-backed cryptocurrencies, and obviously there are some energy questions around running of blockchain, etc., etc. But and those I think would make sense if it were a cryptocurrency discussion that we're having today. I think the point for me is that yes, we need to take power away from banks, and we need to really focus on making things easier. I mean, to make an example, why I'm saying this, if you had to do a business transaction with somebody in Nigeria and you wanted to send them just 500 rands, if you would go through a traditional bank, it will take you, I'm certain, probably a week to actually get that money to that person via traditional banking systems. But with the innovation and the technology that exists, you know, with everything that we have, we definitely are supposed to be able to do things quicker, and blockchain allows us to do that. And I think in summary, I won't be long on this point, is that Reza, I think, yes, we definitely need to move away from traditional banking systems to decentralized banking via blockchain. The second thing, though, I have to add for myself personally, I really believe in asset-backed cryptos, where there is an asset that can be associated to justify the value of the particular token that is in the crypto. And again, I don't want this to be a crypto discussion. The big issue that is quite topical in many people's minds is the fact that if you own a Bitcoin, although it has a lot of value at the moment, what do you really own? So it is, which is why Warren Buffett are known to have said that, you know, they don't believe in Bitcoin because it is, you know, it's pie in the sky in a sense. And I sort of get that, but there are many different cryptos out there. A lot have some backing. I mean, there's cryptos. I mean, new age cryptos are actually used as a fundraising mechanism. And actually, when you own a token, you own a share, as you would in a listed company on the JSE, of a particular business. And this is what drives the value of the token. Yeah.
Thank you on that. I think you've addressed some of the issues that Umakulu generally raises around the issue of cryptocurrency, which is the energy drain. on the environment. So I do think it is not an either or, but rather a matter of how do we improve on the various different technological solutions that are being put forward to make sure that we are not digging our own hole in terms of bankrupting our environmental climate while trying to essentially solve in the short term. So I think it does become a both and. We do have a comment actually from Ulwazi Mayegiso, and it goes as follows. Thank you to the panel for the wonderful discussion. I think everyone agrees that entrepreneurs are key to the improvement of our people. That said, when we talk policy, can we start influencing DTI Treasury to stop milking startup businesses with unnecessary filing charges and forced to open a bank account coming with charges before your business even takes off? So I do think that's an important conversation. And as is the intention of us hosting these engagements, it will be to learn from you as well as the panelists of people to potentially reach out to in terms of hosting the next series of these dialogues and conversations. So thank you very much for that point, Wazi. And Reza again has spoken to using the traditional way to change the traditional financial systems will result in many roadblocks. We need to reimagine the way finance is operated. And I think that's a very important point to bring that starts freeing us of the context that we find ourselves in and engaging in a way that says, how do we get ourselves thinking outside the box and engaging in viable ways to, in essence, find a means of exploiting the opportunities that are here. And I know that's a challenging word to use given the exploitative nature of our current economy and how organizations have operated for some time, but nonetheless looking at a viable way to engage and enhance the opportunities rather for us to improve and work together. And just mindful of time and it being 15 minutes left, still allowing for any of the participants to share some of their questions. But I think as we continue with the comments, as we wrap up this morning's program, I'd like to invite each of the panelists to also speak to meaningful ways to not only engage with the organizations that they represent, understanding that they took this platform in their personal capacities and just so happened to be doing this important work. But I think for each of us as guests on the actual webinar, it'd be important to learn how some of the institutions go about solving for a lot of the discussion that we've had this morning, but also gaining a sense of how as this collective we can continue as part of thinking out that box, finding ways to join hands and improve in the work that we're doing. I see your hand is raised, Dr. Ramphele.
Yes. I think we need to go back to a word which has been used here, which actually encapsulates the organization that we started, it's now almost 5 years ago, Reimagine South Africa. What led to the formation of Reimagine South Africa was the sense of the roadblocks that people are talking about, the sense of the frustration of looking at public servants who are not serving the people, but also a sense of frustration of South Africans having forgotten that they were not liberated by an army that came over the borders. We were liberated by ourselves as people who stood up and said, we are Black, we are proud, we are not allowing anybody to call us non-whites, and we are going to make this country a conscious part of Africa, drawing on the richness of that heritage. We seem to have forgotten that. We have gone back to ceding our agency to shape the futures that we desire to others. We're waiting for the government. We're waiting for the private sector. That waiting is not going to bring forward the changes that we need. And so ReimagineSA is really a call to South African citizens to reimagine the future they would like to have, given the experiences we have had. Someone talking about using the traditional way of changing the traditional financial system will result in roadblocks. We seem to, again, have forgotten that the buying power of the majority of those people that we look at in the streets or in the villages, they look like powerless. But with a reimagined future and active young people, because remember, we were the great unwashed of the 70s, you have access to online tools to mobilize at a blindingly fast pace. We can and we must mobilize. I would like each one of you as entrepreneurs who have met with Treasury's blockades to name and shame them, because they are not there to serve Wall Street or IMF or World Bank, or indeed even their own interests. They're there to serve us. And it's time for us as South Africans to reimagine what it means to be citizens, not allow anybody to tell us that one party or other is the leader of society. No such thing in a democracy. In a democracy, citizens always have the option of choosing new leaders. And those leaders, 2 of them, 3 of them are here in this panel. And I know many of them are there, out there in South Africa and in the audience. So I am thrilled to see the likes of Shakes, Ottilia, and others who are my leaders now. Thank you.
Handing over the baton, Siyabulela Makhulu. Shakes, I'd like to bring over to you for any closing remarks that you may have, and also continue to make the point around any invitations to work with either your institution or the various partners that you may have.
Okay, sure. So I think for me, I'll start on the back end. There's 2 very interesting businesses at the moment that I think anybody who's listening to or part of this webinar can think of is we'll be running what I've termed a tripartite alliance. So it's a banking, insurance, telecoms business. And we want to find ways in which we can add value and change the lives of previously disadvantaged South Africans via the financial services sector, which is made up of the tripartite alliance. So if anybody has got thoughts or ideas on how we can do that, I mean, we're starting out small. We've got all of the big financial institutions against us, but we believe we have a very huge advantage in that we are doing what we're doing for a very different reason, you know, and I think that's what sets us apart, right? I think my last thoughts go back to...
But you also have the numbers, Shakes.
Yeah, we've got the numbers as well, yes. So that's why I'm inviting people to actually help me get the numbers on board and get the businesses to actually muscle out the big players, as it were, you know. So the final point for me goes back to what you mentioned, Doc, about pride.
Seems those big telecoms are busy typing his comment. Sorry, can you say that again?
They're fighting with us, yeah. All right. Oh, okay. So so I was saying, so my final sort of contribution, I suppose, is to say that the Doc mentioned pride, pride in ourselves, pride in who we are, pride about where we come from. And I think when you look at, for instance, public officials that are involved in corruption, my opinion is they don't have pride. If you are put in a position of leadership and you are given funds, it's not your funds, it's actually the public's funds. Remember, taxes are public's, it's the public's money. And you are given a portfolio to perhaps say build toilets, I'll make an example. If you are a proud person, you will take that responsibility very seriously and you will deliver those toilets and you'll be proud if you have done that. Now, the problem we have at the moment is that most Africans have lost their pride and they're very selfish and inward. They've forgotten who they are. They're behaving as non-Africans, in my opinion. If they were proud Africans, they would do what they're supposed to do. They would not take public office unless they believed that they were meant to serve the citizens of the country. Now, the problem we have in the country is that we have lost our pride. And maybe what I'm putting as a final piece to the puzzle is to say, how do we get us to get our pride back? You know, this is probably the biggest single problem that we have, and understand our value, our worth, and stop stealing, stop doing all of these, you know, wrong behaviors and things, because it is not us, you know. And once we solve those things and we believe in ourselves, we are capable. We will be able to achieve anything, but we need to regain our pride. I think that's my final.
Thank you very much for that, Shakes. Ottilia, Siswa?
Thank you, Luvuyo, and thanks also, I think, to Dr. Ramphele and Shakes. It's been really great having this conversation with you, as well as Reza, Ganesh, everyone in the chat. I think it's been really great engaging on a topic that for sure is not limited to an hour and a half. Before just my brief final thought, I did want to say, when the conversation around blockchain was happening, I kept thinking, please, can we have a situation where people, Kwamhlanga, have electricity first before we deprive them of it? Because it costs a lot and it takes a lot as well. And I think in the ideal world, perhaps we would be able to have that kind of technology as a key alternative to transacting. But I really need for the rest of society to enjoy clean drinking water, to have electricity, before I transact with a mystery man from New Zealand. In terms of final thoughts, for me, this conversation has been really enriching. And my main point will always be, when we leave these rooms, because we are all in separate rooms, but when we leave these rooms that we're in, let's do something that Dr. Ramphele said we have forgotten to do. Let's acknowledge the people around us. A lot of innovation, a very old economist, Esther Bosserup, summed it up as sort of necessity being the mother of invention. But a lot of innovation comes from those spaces. It comes from speaking to people and understanding what it is that they need to live, but also recognizing that there's a lot of innovation that is lost simply because we think we need to speak to an actuary. We think we need to speak to a lawyer. We think we need to speak to an activist in order for us to get those ideas going, when in fact we just need to speak with as many people as possible, because it's in that diversity of views and diversity of ways of doing things that we can be able to do that. My final note, I work for a non-governmental organization. We are an African organization, so while we do a lot of work within the South African context, we also look to the other 54 countries on the continent. And the thing that drives our organization, but the thing that drives me also, is if we can be able to make the conditions conducive for all Africans to achieve the most that they can, then let's do that. And for a lot of people, you think in an entrepreneurial way, which I really encourage overall, but for us, it really means ensuring that I feel as safe as Shakes feels when he leaves his house after sundown, that I have equal opportunity and access to resources, that we don't speak about leaving the Joburg CBD because it's now overrun, but actually we look at the fact that a space that was previously inaccessible to the majority of the population is a space now that people are able to sell their wares and make ends meet in a way that hopefully in the future will be safer, more secure, and more comfortable. It's in those spaces that we're going to find innovation. But finally, Luvuyo, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Kubulelamna, to everyone that's made the time to join us this morning. Thank you very much for your contributions. Today is by no means the end of this conversation. It is but the first of many steps as we find ways to learn from one another, to join hands in this journey of reimagining ourselves, first and foremost, in a role of bringing forward a reimagined South Africa. Thank you very much again for making the time and your contributions. And we do look forward to hosting you on our next conversation. So when we do have that ready and available, please do join us and share your contributions. And this recording, once reviewed, edited accordingly, will be made available on our website. So do visit our website on www.ReimagineSA.com just to engage with previous conversations that we've had and yourselves to make comments around what it is that you think may be an important conversation to follow up on this one. Once again, thank you very much. All the best, and thank you to our panelists for the very meaningful contributions, perspectives shared, and the encouragement. I think in all that we have spoken to today, there is still a strong resonance of hope. There's a strong resonance of people raising their hand, trying to get a sense of what it is that they can bring to the table. And I think that's an important perspective, an important energy, and an important way of being as we come to these conversations. So thank you very much. We look forward to sharing more solutions, and to many who are on the call, do keep your shoulder to the grindstone. And we are aware of some of the work that you're doing, and we look forward to sharing updates on future engagements and future platforms of this nature. Thank you. Siyabulela.